My name is Milo Rivers, and I'm 43 years old. I've worn that age like a badge of modest success, but also like an anchor some days. Camille Rivers, my wife of 16 years, matches me in age, though her accomplishments often feel like they eclipse mine. She's sharp, polished, and adored at her firm, Andrus and Wren Designs. People light up when she walks into a room, like she's the key they've been waiting for to unlock their creativity. I've watched that happen dozens of times. Me? I own Haven-Built Cabinetry, a small business that's kept the lights on and even let us travel once in a while, but it's nothing flashy. Nothing that stops conversations. I've always thought of myself as the supporting cast in Camille's life, the guy with the quiet charm and the steady paycheck. And most days, that was enough. So when Camille mentioned the company's exclusive spring gala, this big, black tie event hosted by their president, Lawrence Dayton, I figured it was just another opportunity to do what I've always done, support her. Cheer her on from the sidelines. Let her shine. She said it was going to be held at the Franklin Hall downtown, the kind of place where the marble floors gleamed like they'd never known a footprint. I pictured myself in a suit I'd only worn twice, standing beside Camille in her sleek, tailored gown. She always looked stunning in formal wear, like she'd been born to glide through a crowd with a glass of wine and a polite smile. I'd just be her plus one. The tag-along. The guy with the easy grin and the folded hands. And that was fine. I liked being there for her. I liked seeing her glow. The morning of the gala, I woke up early, nerves buzzing like a low hum under my skin. Camille had already been up, her coffee half drunk and her phone in her hand, scanning emails like a general surveying the battlefield. I watched her for a minute, admiring the way her hair fell across her cheek, the way her fingers moved fast and sure. She was in her element, even at 6:30 in the morning. She caught me staring and gave me a quick smile, more habit than warmth, and said, "Big night tonight. Don't be late." I nodded, even though I'd never been late to anything that mattered. I spent the day at the shop, finishing a custom walnut cabinet for a repeat client. The sawdust felt familiar, the weight of the wood in my hands a kind of comfort. At noon, I paused to imagine how the evening would go. I'd walk in with Camille, nod at her colleagues, laugh at jokes I didn't quite get, and clap politely when someone made a toast. I'd nurse a single glass of bourbon and keep my mouth shut. That was my job tonight. No hammers, no levels, just smiles and support. I was ready for that. At 6, I went home to change. Camille was already dressed, a deep emerald gown that hugged her curves and shimmered under the bedroom lights. She looked like she belonged on a magazine cover. I told her so, and she laughed, a quick, distracted sound as she turned to check her reflection again. I tried to smooth the lines of my suit, feeling suddenly underdressed even though I'd followed her advice to the letter. She leaned in, gave me a soft kiss on the cheek, and whispered, "Thank you for coming tonight, Milo. It means a lot." I nodded, my throat tight with something I couldn't name. The drive to the gala was quiet. Camille stared out the window, her phone in her lap but untouched. I tried to make small talk, about the cabinet project, about a new client asking for a built-in wine rack, but she only hummed in response, her mind already at the venue. I didn't take it personally. This was her night, and I was just along for the ride. I focused on the road, on the way the city lights blurred in the windshield. We arrived at Franklin Hall, and even from the curb, I could see it was the kind of place where people came to be seen. Spotlights lit the sidewalk, casting gold and white glows over the guests streaming in. Valets in pressed uniforms opened car doors with practiced grace. I stepped out and adjusted my jacket. Camille took my arm, her perfume warm and floral, and together we walked up the steps. She smiled at the doorman like she'd known him for years. He grinned back, tipping his cap, and suddenly I felt like the world was a stage she'd been born to own. Inside, it was exactly what I'd expected, polished marble floors that seemed to stretch forever, a ceiling that looked like a constellation of crystal. Waiters in black vests carried trays of drinks, weaving through clusters of men in sharp suits and women in designer dresses. A string quartet played softly near the bar, their music floating like a warm breeze. Camille's coworkers were already gathering, glasses raised, eyes bright. They spotted her and swooped in, all smiles and cheek kisses. I stood back, hands in my pockets, letting her shine. That's what I was here for, after all. Just a plus one. Just a tag along. But as I watched her laugh and talk, I wondered if she saw me at all. If she'd introduce me, or just let me fade into the background like a ghost. She caught my eye and waved me over, her smile bright but a little forced. I walked to her side, nodding politely as she made the rounds, but no one really looked at me. I was the husband, the cabinet guy, the plus one, the man who'd walk out of here at the end of the night, slip off his jacket, and wait for her to tell me how it all went. And that was fine. Really, it was. I'd built my life around supporting her, and I'd never wanted to take her place. But something in her eyes tonight felt different. Like she'd been waiting for this. Like she'd stepped into a world that didn't have room for me anymore. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on the music, the way the lights danced on the glasses, the scent of fresh flowers drifting through the air. I was just a plus one, right? Just a plus one. And for now, that was enough. Camille had been under pressure for weeks. More than I'd ever seen in the 16 years we'd been together. Every evening, she'd come home with that forced smile, her lips tight and her eyes dark like a storm behind glass. She'd kick off her heels, drop her purse by the door, and give me a mechanical kiss on the cheek, like a ritual we were both too tired to question. Andrus and Wren Designs was a prestigious firm with a reputation for being both cutthroat and innovative. They designed everything from luxury hotels to state-of-the-art workspaces, and Camille was their shining star. She'd been headhunted 2 years ago by the CEO himself, Lawrence Dayton, and she'd risen faster than any of us expected. But this year was different. They'd hired a new VP, Blair St. James. And I'd heard her name come up more often than I'd heard my own. Even in our own home, Blair St. James was a name that carried weight, even in the construction circles I moved in. She was the kind of woman who walked into a room and made every other conversation stop. Word had it she could kill a deal with a single glance, or make a career with one well-placed compliment. Camille idolized her in a way that made me uneasy. She'd talk about Blair the way some people talk about celebrities, her voice filled with admiration and a trace of fear. "She's brilliant, Milo," she'd say as she scrolled through her phone at night, half listening as I talked about a new cabinet design I'd sketched that day. She knows what it takes. I'd nod and pretend to understand, even though I couldn't remember the last time Camille had called me brilliant. As we drove to the venue that evening, the silence in the car felt heavy enough to buckle the doors. I glanced at Camille, hoping to catch her eyes, but she was staring straight ahead, fingers tapping a restless rhythm on her clutch. The streetlights slid across her face like spotlights on a stage, highlighting the tension in her jaw, the shallow rise and fall of her breath. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but I knew better. Camille wasn't the type to talk about feelings before an event like this. She needed to stay composed, to hold that mask of perfection in place for just a few more hours. We pulled into the Franklin Hall valet line, and Camille gave the attendant a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He opened her door like she was royalty, and she stepped out, adjusting the strap of her emerald dress with a practiced grace. I climbed out on my side and joined her, offering my arm. She hesitated a split second before taking it. That pause felt like a crack in the foundation of the house we built together. But maybe I was imagining things. The venue itself was a marvel of architecture, marble floors polished to a mirror's shine, a vaulted ceiling that seemed to disappear into shadows lit by elegant chandeliers. A string quartet played something soft and expensive-sounding near the entrance, and the smell of lavender and citrus drifted from hidden arrangements tucked between white linen tablecloths. People in tuxedos and designer gowns milled about, glasses of sparkling wine in hand, their laughter echoing off the stone columns. I tried not to stare at the wealth on display, but it was hard not to feel out of place. Camille's co-workers descended on her the moment we stepped through the door. Glossy smiles, air kisses, perfectly rehearsed greetings that reminded me of scripted lines in a play. They all looked the same, slim, manicured, eyes bright with ambition and something sharper lurking underneath. They said all the right words to her. "You look amazing, Cam." Blair's so impressed with the March project. "Dayton can't stop talking about your design concepts." But when their eyes flicked to me, it was like I was invisible. Or worse, like I was a prop she'd brought along to complete the picture of her perfect life. Camille's fingers tightened on my arm just once, like a reminder that I needed to be on my best behavior. I nodded, offering polite smiles and murmured greetings, but I felt like a ghost. They didn't ask me what I did or how I was. They didn't ask anything. I was the plus one, the accessory, the man behind the woman. I spotted Blair St. James near the bar, holding court with a small cluster of people who leaned in like sunflowers to her son. She was as striking as Camille had described, tall, with a cascade of silver hair that looked deliberate, her makeup flawless, her posture straight and commanding. She turned her head slightly, catching sight of Camille, and a slow smile spread across her face. It wasn't warm. It wasn't even polite. It was the kind of smile that said, "I see you. Now prove you're worth seeing." Camille's breath caught, just for a second. Then she pulled her shoulders back and led me over to the table with her coworkers, like a general leading a parade. The table was long, draped in white linen, and set with gold-rimmed glasses and tiny name cards in elegant script. I scanned the row of cards, expecting to see my name. Milo Rivers, husband of Camille, polite +1. Instead, I froze. There, in a perfect, flowing gold script, was a card that read, "Idiot Trash." I stared at it. For a full 5 seconds, my brain refused to compute. Idiot trash? My fingers curled around the edge of the chair as laughter sparked around me. Soft at first, then louder, like a wave of broken glass. Camille let out a nervous chuckle, her eyes darting toward Blair. And Blair was smiling, lips pressed together in a smirk that said everything. A coworker across the table, a young man with a perfect haircut, snapped a quick photo and held up his phone. "That's classic," he said, his voice dripping with delight. My face felt hot. My ears rang. I'd known these people for maybe 20 minutes, but I felt like I'd known them forever. The way they looked at me, like I was a bug under glass, something to be poked and prodded for their amusement. Camille reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. I didn't say a word. Not yet. I just lowered myself into the chair, placed my hands calmly in my lap, and forced a smile. It felt like glass on my tongue. This was supposed to be her world, her night, her people. I was just the +1, right? Just the +1. But in that moment, I realized I was so much more than that. And they just reminded me of exactly who I didn't want to be. It was supposed to be a dinner party, not a public execution. But that's exactly what it felt like when I stared at the name card in front of me. Idiot Trash, written in fancy gold script like it was an inside joke I'd somehow agreed to be part of. I blinked once, then twice, hoping the letters might rearrange themselves into something else, anything else. But they stayed there, crisp and defiant, reflecting the soft glow of the table's centerpiece candles. My stomach twisted. I'd always known Camille's coworkers saw me as a sideshow act, a harmless cabinet maker tagging along for the free food, but I hadn't expected to be branded. Around me, the laughter spread like a virus. Soft giggles first, then sharper, more pointed laughter, the kind that scrapes along your spine and makes your ears burn. I could feel the heat rising in my face, the tightness in my chest that comes when humiliation crawls up your throat and threatens to choke you. Camille was no help. She chuckled nervously, glancing at Blair as if seeking approval or permission. Blair raised her glass in a slow, deliberate gesture, her eyes locked on mine, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth like a cat toying with a half-dead mouse. One coworker, a guy with slicked back hair and a too-tight vest, snapped a picture on his phone. I could see the glow of the screen, the way he lined up the shot like it was a prize. "Oh, man," he said, grinning at his screen. "This is going on the group chat for sure." Another woman leaned over, trying not to laugh too loudly, but failing miserably. "This is so Blair," she whispered to her friend. "She always knows how to make a statement." My fingers dug into the linen napkin on my lap, and for a second, I thought I might tear it in half. But instead, I forced my lips into a smile. It felt like lifting 1,000 pounds with one finger. My eyes moved slowly across the table, catching the expressions of the people who were supposed to be Camille's team. Their eyes danced with delight, anticipation, a hunger for spectacle. I was the entertainment for the night, and they'd paid for front-row seats. Camille shifted beside me, her voice a thin thread of forced calm. "It's just a joke, Milo," she said, leaning in, her perfume too strong and suddenly cloying. "Don't overreact. Blair has a quirky sense of humor, that's all." But her eyes, God, her eyes told me everything. They darted around, checking the faces at the table, scanning for judgment. She wasn't defending me. She was making sure I didn't ruin her night. Blair's voice cut through the air like a blade. "We're creatives, Milo. We go for irony. You know, subverting expectations." Her words dripped with condescension, each syllable a carefully placed dagger. I wanted to stand up, to flip the table and tell them all exactly what I thought of their brand of irony, but something in me refused to give them that satisfaction. I'd spent my whole life building things, shelves, cabinets, intricate pieces that fit together seamlessly. I wasn't about to let a room full of corporate sharks tear me apart with a single joke. I took a breath. One slow, measured breath that steadied the fire in my chest. Then I did the one thing they didn't expect. I pulled out the chair, sat down, folded my hands neatly on the table, and smiled. A real smile, not the fake one I'd been practicing all evening. A smile that said, I see you. I see all of you. And you can't break me. For a moment, the laughter stumbled. Blair's smirk faltered just a hair. Camille's eyes widened in surprise. The guy with the phone lowered it, his grin slipping. The spell was broken, even if just for a second. I held their gaze, refusing to let my expression crack. Inside, I was screaming at the absurdity, the cruelty, the betrayal of the woman I'd promised to love and cherish. But on the outside, I was stone. The waiter came by with the wine, oblivious to the tension that vibrated in the air like a live wire. He poured a glass for me, his hand steady, his face neutral. I took it, raised it slightly, and clinked glasses with Camille. She tried to smile, but it crumbled at the edges. She knew. She knew exactly what this was, a test of loyalty. And I could see in her eyes that she'd failed it before she'd even tried. I took a sip of the wine, letting the taste roll across my tongue. It was bitter, sharp, expensive. I set the glass down carefully, aligning it perfectly with the edge of my name card. So, I said, my voice calm measured. What's on the menu tonight? Other than me, of course. A ripple of laughter moved around the table, but it was different this time, uneasy, uncertain. Blair's eyes narrowed just a touch. She didn't like that I'd spoken. She didn't like that I wasn't playing my part. Camille leaned over, her hand brushing mine like a question mark. Please, Milo, she whispered, her voice trembling. Don't do this. Not here. Not tonight. Her fingers were cold against my skin, and I wanted to pull away, but I didn't. Instead, I turned to her and met her eyes, steady and unflinching. Don't do what, Cam? I asked, my voice low but clear enough for the table to hear. Don't embarrass you? Or don't embarrass them? Her eyes darted away, and I knew the answer. Blair cleared her throat. Let's move on, shall we? She said, her tone crisp, commanding. No need to dwell on a little harmless fun. We're all professionals here. She picked up her fork and began to eat, as if nothing had happened. The rest of the table followed her lead, plates clinking, conversations resuming. But I could feel the tension like a second skin. I sat there, the name card in front of me like a brand. Idiot trash. It was supposed to be funny, but to me it was a declaration, a line in the sand. And I knew right then and there that I was done playing the plus one. I was done letting them treat me like I was less than the man I'd built myself to be. I might have come here to support Camille, to smile and clap and play the part. But this was something else. I sat back, watching them, each face a mask, each laugh a dagger. And in that moment, I decided something important. I wouldn't let them define me. I wouldn't let them take my dignity. They might think I was idiot trash, but they were about to find out exactly what that meant. Camille leaned toward me, her breath a mixture of wine and nerves. Her whisper was urgent, like a parent scolding a child in church. They're just kidding, babe. Don't overreact. Her hand fluttered to my forearm, cold and trembling. Her eyes darted around the table, scanning faces, making sure no one noticed her shame at my discomfort. But I noticed. I saw every flicker of her eyelids, every quiver of her lips, every shift in her posture, as if she were ready to shrink under the table. I stared at her, that mask of composure slipping for the first time since we'd left the house. She didn't say, I'm sorry. She didn't say, that was cruel. Instead, she told me not to make it about me, as if my name on that card hadn't been the opening act for the evening's entertainment. As if I was supposed to laugh along and then vanish, a supporting character in a play that starred everyone but me. Across the table, Blair was swirling her wine like a priest offering communion. Her eyes found mine and held them, as if testing my limits. We're creatives, Milo. We go for irony. Her smile was thin, cutting, the kind that slices deeper because it's framed by perfect lipstick and an audience. It's all in good fun. You can take a joke, right? The rest of the table tittered, heads bobbing, eyes flickering back and forth like they'd been trained to do. A polite, practiced laugh. I forced a smile that felt foreign on my face, a gesture that tasted like vinegar. Of course, I said, my voice calm but colder than the ice melting in my untouched glass. I've always been good at taking a joke. The lie settled in my chest like a stone, because I wasn't laughing. I wasn't even amused. I was hurt, and I was angry. But I'd spent a lifetime learning how to hide that, how to tuck it away behind polite smiles and deferential nods. I'd learned to accept that I was always the plus one, the extra, the guy who showed up to clap politely and then fade into the background. I'd thought that was enough. But tonight, it felt like a prison sentence. I leaned back, letting the candlelight flicker in my glass. Blair raised her eyebrows, waiting for me to explode, to make a scene that would justify their label. I could almost hear the script in her head. Oh, he overreacted. He couldn't handle a joke. The same script Camille was reading from when she told me not to make it about me. But I wasn't about to play the fool for them. Not tonight. So I laughed, low and measured. I get it, I said, letting the words roll slowly, like smoke. It's a branding thing. Andrus and Wren loves its irony. I picked up the name card, turning it between my fingers like a delicate piece of evidence. Very on brand. Blair's smirk deepened, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of control. Exactly, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. We're all family here, Milo. You understand. Family. The word made my skin crawl. Families protect each other. They lift each other up. They don't label someone idiot trash and laugh about it over dinner. But I bit my tongue and let the silence stretch. I watched Camille's eyes dart around the table, gauging reactions, gauging me. Her fingers drummed an uneven rhythm on the tablecloth, her bracelet clinking like a tiny warning bell. Of course, I said again, softer this time, as if I were agreeing to something unspoken. My gaze drifted to the silverware, polished to a mirror finish, and then back to Blair. You know, it's funny, I continued, my voice casual but edged with something sharper. I've been supplying your firm with custom cabinetry for 6 years. I've built your conference rooms, your kitchen break rooms, your executive offices. Hell, I even installed that glass feature wall in your lobby last year. But I guess the real brand is, I flicked the name card with my finger. This. A hush fell over the table. Even Blair's smirk wavered for a fraction of a second. I saw it. I felt it. The ripple of unease that always comes when the target stands up, even if just with words. Camille's lips parted, her face pale. She reached for me, but I leaned away. I wasn't about to let her touch me, not after she'd let this happen. Blair recovered quickly, her laugh ringing out, too loud, too rehearsed. Well, she said, raising her glass like a queen in a castle. We appreciate your craftsmanship, Milo. Truly. Let's toast to that. Her eyes met mine, daring me to challenge her. I raised my glass, but I didn't toast. I set it down slowly, deliberately. I looked at Blair, then at Camille, then at each person at that table who had laughed at me. I think, I said, my voice steady, I'm done being the plus one. Camille's face crumbled, her eyes wide. Milo, please, she whispered. But it was too late. I decided. My heart was pounding so hard I thought the whole table could hear it. But I didn't let it show. I stood, smoothing the front of my jacket. Excuse me, I said, my tone formal, cold. I need some air. I turned, ignoring Camille's outstretched hand, ignoring the hush that had fallen. Blair called after me, don't be so sensitive, Milo. It's just a joke. I didn't turn back. I kept walking, each step carrying me away from the table, away from the laughter, away from the lie I'd been living. I was done playing their game, done pretending I was okay with being the man behind the woman who couldn't, or wouldn't, defend him. I reached the hallway, the cool marble walls a welcome contrast to the suffocating heat of that table. I stopped, my breath ragged but controlled. My reflection in the glass door was pale, my eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt awake. Behind me, I could hear the muffled laughter resuming. The dinner would go on. The wine would flow. But I wouldn't be part of it. Not anymore. I'd spent too long letting them brand me with their labels, letting them treat me like a sideshow. But tonight, I decided to walk away from all of it. The dinner, the disrespect, and the company my business had been quietly supplying for the last 6 years. Maybe they'd learn. Maybe they wouldn't. But that was their problem now. I was done being idiot trash. I was done being their joke. And in that quiet hallway, with the laughter fading behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Midway through dessert, a delicate construction of chocolate mousse and edible gold leaf that cost more than I earned in a day. I stood up. My chair scraped against the marble floor, the sound sharp enough to slice through the murmur of polite conversation. Camille's hand shot out, her fingers catching my sleeve in a silent plea. Milo, please sit, she whispered, her voice tight, a tremor in her eyes that felt like a threat and a cry for help all at once. I met her gaze, saw the panic in her pupils, and knew she was thinking about the damage I might cause. Damage to her image, to her carefully cultivated place in this kingdom of power suits and Art Deco chandeliers. I gently pulled my sleeve from her grasp, feeling her fingers slip away like water. "I'm just stepping out," I said, my voice calm, controlled, each word a quiet rebellion. I smoothed my jacket as I turned, scanning the room until my eyes landed on the bar-polished mahogany, manned by a single bartender in a crisp white shirt. And there, in conversation with a regional partner, stood Lawrence Dayton himself, the president of Andrus and Wren Designs. His presence radiated authority even in the sea of tailored suits and curated smiles. He wore his success like a custom-made armor, each button gleaming with a kind of effortless confidence. I'd only met him twice before, both times during installations my company had done at their flagship office. He'd been polite, gracious even, praising my craftsmanship and talking about how Haven-Built's work had saved them money and elevated their brand. But tonight, he was just another face in a crowd until now. I walked straight toward him, my steps even, my heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. Each step felt like it carried 1,000 unsaid words, every slight, every patronizing laugh, every dismissive glance I'd absorbed over the years. Camille's voice called faintly behind me, but I didn't look back. This was between me and the people who thought they could brand me idiot trash and still get the best of my work. Lawrence turned as I approached, his eyes lighting up with polite recognition. "Milo Rivers," he said, extending a hand like a man who just remembered an important connection. "Of course, Haven-Built Cabinetry. Your custom installations saved our Grace and Property budget last quarter. That was brilliant work." His words rang with the kind of practice praise that came naturally to men like him, an appreciation for a job well done, nothing more, nothing less. But for the first time, I didn't shrink under it. I took his hand and shook it firmly, feeling the strength in his grip, and knowing I wasn't the only one with something to lose. "Thank you," I said, letting my voice stay calm, even. "Your team's always been good to work with, at least, they were until tonight." His smile faltered. "I'm sorry, tonight? What's wrong?" I held up my phone, screen aglow with the photo I'd taken earlier at the table. The name card in its perfect, elegant script. "Idiot trash." The letters glared at us, a condemnation in gold foil. Lawrence's eyes darted from the screen to me, confusion flickering across his face. "Ask your VP and her team," I said, my voice low but steady, the words sharper than any blade I'd ever held. "Ask them why they thought it was funny to put this at my place setting. Ask them why they laughed." He stared at the photo, his brow furrowing. I saw the gears turning, the weight of responsibility shifting as he realized this wasn't just a joke gone wrong. This was a potential scandal, an embarrassment that could tarnish the company's reputation. "Mr. Rivers," he began, his voice now edged with concern. I'm sure there's some misunderstanding. Let's sit down, we can talk." I shook my head. "I'm not here to talk it through. I came here tonight to support my wife, to celebrate her achievements. But instead, I was humiliated at her table, by her team, and by extension, your company." His mouth opened, but I didn't give him a chance to respond. I leaned in just slightly, my voice low enough that only he could hear, but firm enough that he'd never forget it. "I'm cutting ties with Andrus and Wren. Effective tonight." His eyes widened, his face paling under the soft glow of the bar lights. "Wait, Milo, let's not be hasty. Your craftsmanship, your team." "My team will be fine," I said, my voice final. "We have other contracts, and now, we'll have more time to focus on clients who respect what we do, and who we are." He blinked, his jaw tightening, his hand dropping to his side. "I'm sorry," he murmured, but the words felt like they were spoken by someone far away. "I didn't know. That's the problem," I said, my tone measured. "You didn't know, and now you do." I stepped back, my heart hammering, but my spine straight. I felt a lightness in my chest, a freedom that came with finally standing up, finally choosing myself over the shadows I'd been living in. As I turned to leave, I saw Blair across the room, her laughter frozen on her lips, her glass halfway to her mouth. Her eyes locked on me, confusion and annoyance warring for control. Camille was beside her, pale and trembling, her eyes wide with disbelief. I didn't stop to talk to either of them. I walked out of that room with my head held high, each step carrying me away from the person they'd tried to define me as, away from the plus one who'd stayed silent for too long. Outside, the night air was crisp and cool, a relief after the stifling warmth of that ballroom. I took a deep breath, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, and felt something in me settle. Something that had been rattling loose for years. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking towards something better. I didn't know what it would look like yet, but I knew this. It would have my name on it. No gold foil. No mockery. Just mine. And I was okay with that. Lawrence Dayton blinked, his face a shifting canvas of confusion, disbelief, and something that looked like shock. The kind of look you'd expect from a man whose house had just been broken into, but the thief wasn't there for the silver. No, the thief had come for the truth. "Excuse me," he asked, his voice softer now, almost brittle. A man used to being in charge, caught off guard by someone he'd thought too small to matter. I didn't waver. My hands were steady at my sides, my phone still glowing in my pocket like a smoking gun. I looked him dead in the eye, holding his gaze so he couldn't look away. "Ask your VP and her team," I said, letting every syllable land with the weight of a hammer. "Ask them why my place card read, idiot trash." I felt the words settle in the air, sharp and undeniable, the way the truth always does. His face tensed like he'd just been slapped. I pulled the phone from my pocket, the screen lit with the photo I'd snapped. My name card in gold script, that hateful label mocking me from the linen tablecloth. I didn't have to say a word as I handed it to him. His eyes darted from the photo to me, then to the bustling gala behind us where Blair was holding court, her laughter ringing like a bell over the polished marble. He exhaled, a sound somewhere between disbelief and anger. This is unacceptable," he muttered. But his voice lacked the conviction of a man who'd built his empire on polished smiles and sealed deals. I straightened my back, feeling taller than I'd felt in years. "I respect my wife," I said, the words rolling out of me like a vow I'd been waiting to make. "I came in peace. But now, I leave with pride." I let that sink in, let him feel the finality of it. I wasn't asking for an apology. I wasn't begging for respect. I was taking it. Behind me, the noise from the dining hall continued like a distant party I was no longer part of. Plates clinked, laughter rose and fell, and somewhere, a violin played a piece I couldn't name. But it all felt muted, like I'd stepped through a door into a different world, one where I didn't have to prove my worth to anyone. Dayton's fingers curled around the phone, his thumb brushing the screen as if he could erase the image by smudging it. "Milo," he said, his voice softer now, a note of desperation threading through his tone. "You have to understand, this isn't who we are. We value every vendor, every partner." "Save it," I interrupted, my voice calm but carrying a firmness that surprised even me. "I've been quietly supplying your company for 6 years. My team has worked nights, weekends, and holidays to deliver the best. We've taken pride in every project. And this is what I get in return." I let the silence stretch, let the guilt settle like dust in the air. He opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance to spin another polished corporate apology. "I'm not asking for an explanation," I continued. "I'm telling you that your company's name no longer deserves the work I do. I'm cutting ties. Effective tonight." For a second, the mask of the president slipped, and I saw the man underneath, the one who'd built his reputation on deals and handshakes, but maybe hadn't looked too closely at the details. The one who'd let people like Blair thrive because she got results, because she made the company look good, on paper, at least. His jaw tightened, and he nodded once, slow and deliberate. "You're right," he said finally, the words heavy, each one a confession. "You deserve better than this." I nodded, the finality of it washing over me like a cold rain. "Yeah," I said, my voice low but steady. "I do." And then I turned, letting the moment hang like a painting on a wall, and started walking away. Each step felt like a victory, a declaration that I wouldn't be defined by their laughter or their labels. That I was more than a +1, more than the man who showed up to clap politely and then fade into the background. Behind me, I heard Dayton's voice, louder now, sharp as a command. "Blair," he barked. "In my office. Now." His tone was laced with anger and something else, fear, maybe, or the realization that the empire he'd built might have cracks in its foundation. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The hallway was empty, the carpet muffling my footsteps as I made my way toward the exit. I could feel the eyes on me, curious glances from strangers, staff members pausing mid-step, wondering what story they'd just walked into. But I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't playing a part. I was just Milo Rivers, a man who refused to let someone else's label define him. I reached the door and pushed it open, the night air cool and sharp against my face. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the evening lift off my shoulders like a burden I'd carried for far too long. I glanced back once, just long enough to see the chaos I'd left in my wake, Dayton striding across the floor, his face set in a hard line, Blair staring after him with wide, uncertain eyes, Camille standing by the table, her hands pressed to her mouth like she'd just witnessed something unthinkable. And maybe she had. Maybe, for the first time, she'd seen the man she'd married. Not the plus one, not the cabinet guy, but the man who'd build his own life, brick by brick, and who wouldn't let anyone, especially her, take that from him. I turned away, stepping into the night, my mind already turning toward tomorrow, toward the work waiting for me, the team that believed in me, the clients who respected me, and maybe, just maybe, toward a life that felt more like my own. I didn't know exactly what came next, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. Because I'd remembered something important. I was the builder. And no one, no VP, no boss, no dinner table full of fake smiles, could take that away from me. Camille came home hours later. I heard the click of her keys in the door, the familiar rustle of her heels on the tile, the small sigh she always let out when she crossed the threshold of our house, as though home were a costume she could slip off at will. Only tonight, there was no relief in her sigh. It sounded different, strained, almost broken. She stepped into the living room, her eyes scanning the shadows for me. She found me sitting on the sofa, a glass of water in my hand, the TV screen black. I'd left it that way on purpose, a silent room, a place where her excuses would echo without interruption. Her eyes were red, but she tried to hide it by turning away and setting her purse on the entry table. "Why would you embarrass me like that?" she said finally, her voice trembling with anger and something else, fear, maybe, or shame. She turned back to me, arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if she were holding herself together. "You don't understand how that world works." I stared at her, the woman I'd loved, the woman who'd once laughed at my jokes and stayed up with me sketching ideas for the custom cabinetry business we'd built from scratch. But tonight, I saw something different in her eyes, a glimmer of resentment, a thin film of panic. "That world," I repeated, the words like pebbles on my tongue. "The world where your boss thinks it's funny to call your husband idiot trash? The world where you sit there and let them laugh at me like I'm not even a human being? That world." I let the silence hang heavy between us. She flinched, her arms tightening. "It was just a joke," she said, her voice too high, too brittle. "You know, Blair, she's always had that sense of humor. It's her way of..." "Of what?" I cut in, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Of humiliating people who don't fit her idea of creative? Of reminding everyone at that table that they're better than me?" I set the glass down on the coffee table with a quiet clink, the sound more final than a slammed door. "You laughed, Camille. You laughed with them. And then you told me not to make it about me." She swallowed, her eyes glistening. "I didn't mean to." "But you did," I said, my tone softer now but no less firm. "You chose them. You chose to sit there and let them define me. And that's the part one can't just swallow down like it didn't happen." She sat down across from me, her posture rigid, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "You don't understand," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "You don't know what it's like in that office. Every day is a test. Blair, she's ruthless. One wrong move, and you're out. You have no idea how hard I've worked to get where I am." I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, my eyes locked on hers. "Then maybe I don't belong in your world anymore," I said, each word a quiet detonation in the space between us. Her breath caught, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. She blinked hard, pressing her lips together until they were a thin, colorless line. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice flat. "You're just going to walk away?" I took a slow, steady breath. "No, Camille," I said. "You're the one who walked away. Maybe not with your feet, but with your silence, with your laughter, with your refusal to stand up for me." I stood then, the motion slow but deliberate, like a man reclaiming his place in the world. "I'm done pretending that my place is behind you, waiting for you to remember I exist." Her eyes filled, but she didn't move. "Milo," she whispered, but the word felt empty, like a name she'd borrowed from someone else's story. I turned and headed toward the kitchen, needing distance, needing space to breathe. I could feel her eyes on my back, heavy with things unsaid. But I didn't turn around. I didn't give her the comfort of my attention, not this time. The house was too quiet, the clock on the wall ticking like a slow metronome, each second stretching into an eternity. I gripped the edge of the counter, letting the cold granite ground me. I thought about the years we'd spent building a life together, the late nights, the shared dreams, the whispered promises. But I also thought about every time I'd put her needs ahead of mine, every time I'd been the plus one, the silent supporter, the easy laugh in a sea of cold smiles. She'd let them call me idiot trash, and she'd laughed. I turned back to face her, my eyes steady, my heart suddenly calm. I loved you, I said, my voice low. I loved the woman you used to be, the one who celebrated my victories, who held my hand when things got hard. I don't know where she went, Camille. I don't know if she's ever coming back. But I can't stay here waiting for her. Her lips trembled, her eyes brimming with tears. But she didn't speak. And maybe that was her answer. I walked past her then, to the living room, my footsteps quiet but sure. I felt a weight lift from my chest with every step, like I was finally shedding the part of me that had let her world define mine. Outside, the night air was crisp and full of possibility. I paused on the porch, taking in the stars above, the hush of the wind. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, what conversations we'd have, what battles we'd fight, but I knew this. I wouldn't be the man who let a single table of suits and a woman too afraid to defend him decide his worth. Her silence was sharper than any insult. But deep down, I think she knew I was right. And in that knowing, in that quiet acknowledgement, I felt something shift. Something that felt like freedom. Something that felt like me. 2 days later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen window like a quiet accusation. I stood at the counter, coffee in hand, staring at the same stainless steel sink I'd installed years ago with a sense of pride. That sink had felt like a milestone then, a symbol that we'd made it, that my craft could hold its own in a home like ours. Now, it felt like a relic of a life that didn't quite fit anymore. I took a slow sip, letting the bitterness ground me. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. I set the cup down and moved to the front door, half expecting Camille to be waiting with another round of apologies or explanations. But instead, a courier in a navy jacket stood on the porch, a small box in his hands. "Mr. Rivers?" he asked, checking the label before passing it over. "That's me," I replied, taking the package. His eyes darted to the name on the label, Haven-Built Cabinetry, and he gave me a quick nod before retreating to his van. I closed the door slowly, the box heavier in my hands than it should have been. I carried it to the kitchen table, running my thumb along the tape, feeling the tension gather in my chest. Camille wasn't home yet. She'd left early for the office, promising a quick meeting that probably meant another round of damage control. I opened the box carefully, the flaps peeling back to reveal a stack of letters neatly arranged, each one on the same creamy Andrus and Wren letterhead that had once represented opportunity and pride. The first was from Lawrence Dayton himself. I unfolded it, the paper stiff and formal. His words were measured, heavy with corporate regret, but too carefully phrased to be personal. "Dear Mr. Rivers, I am deeply sorry for the incident at the gala. What occurred was not representative of our values or our respect for the craftsmanship you and your company have provided over the years. Please accept my sincere apologies. We have initiated an internal review to ensure such behavior is not repeated." I let the letter drop to the table. I'd expected it, some gesture from the top, designed to smooth ruffled feathers and protect the brand. But as I reached for the next envelope, my hands paused, the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders. This one was handwritten, the ink smudged in places, the handwriting rushed but sincere. "Dear Milo, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Blair would go that far. I always admired the work you did for us, and the way you supported Camille. I recorded Blair that night, bragging about the prank. I couldn't let it stand. I've already sent the recording to Dayton. I hope it helps. Sierra." I read the letter twice, my heart pounding. Sierra, Camille's colleague. I remembered her, quiet, competent, always polite to me at events. She'd been at the table that night, her eyes downcast as Blair's laughter rang in my ears. And now she'd taken a risk to show me that not everyone at that firm had bought into Blair's brand of cruelty. A third letter sat at the bottom of the stack. No signature, just a typed resignation. Blair St. James. The woman who'd turned a dinner table into a coliseum. Her words were cold, formal, a lifeline made of stone. Effective immediately, I resigned my position at Andrus and Wren Designs. I regret any actions that may have caused harm to the company or its partners. No apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just the finality of a signature at the bottom. I let the letters fall into a neat pile and leaned back in my chair. The kitchen felt too quiet, too bright, like the world had moved on without me. Camille would come home eventually, and she'd find the box. She'd read the letters and understand, maybe for the first time, what her silence had cost. A knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I stood, moving to the hallway, and opened it to find a delivery man standing there, this time with a stack of folders marked Proposal. He handed them to me, his expression professional but polite. "Mr. Rivers? These are from some of the companies that reached out after the gala." I thanked him and brought the stack inside, setting it next to the letters. I thumbed through the folders, each one carrying the logo of a competitor. Design firms, construction companies, boutique architecture studios. Some I'd heard of, others were new. All of them wanted to work with me. They wanted Havenbuilt's name on their projects. A small laugh escaped me, dry, but real. I'd walked away from Andrus and Wren thinking I might lose everything. Instead, I'd opened a door to something new, something better. My phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up, reading the latest email from a potential client. "Mr. Rivers, we heard about what happened at Andrus and Wren. We'd love to discuss a partnership with Havenbuilt. Your craftsmanship and integrity are exactly what we're looking for." Integrity, a word that felt like home in my mouth. The front door opened quietly, and Camille's heels clicked on the wood floor. I turned as she entered the kitchen, her eyes puffy, her hair pulled back too tightly. She saw the box, the letters, the stack of folders, and her face paled. "Milo," she started, but I held up a hand, gentle but firm. "Read them," I said. "Read them all." She sat at the table, picking up each letter with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the words. Her lips parted as she read Sierra's note, her face crumpling at the resignation letter. When she reached the proposals, she looked up at me, tears brimming. I didn't know they'd do this," she whispered. You thought it was a joke," I said, my voice calm. "A joke that cost them 3 employees and a reputation." I gestured to the stack of proposals. "And it cost you your place there, too." Her eyes widened. "They put me on leave," she confessed, her voice shaking. "Pending an investigation." I nodded. "Because you didn't stand up. Because you let them think that kind of behavior was okay." She wiped at her eyes, her hands trembling. "I didn't think it would go that far. You didn't think," I interrupted, not unkindly but firmly. "You didn't think about me, about us. You let them decide what mattered." The silence stretched between us like a bridge we weren't sure how to cross. But in that moment, I felt something like forgiveness. Not for her, maybe not yet, but for myself. For letting it get this far. For thinking that being the +1 was all I was meant to be. I stood, gathering the letters and the proposals, stacking them neatly. "I have work to do," I said, "and a team that believes in me." She nodded, her tears falling freely now. I didn't reach for her. Not yet. Outside, the sun was high, the day full of possibility. My company, my name, was stronger than ever. And as I headed to the workshop, I knew I wasn't the man who'd been branded at that table anymore. I was the man who'd walked away and built something better. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't the kind of silence that followed a fight. It was heavier. Still, like the air was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. Camille sat across from me at the dinner table, where we used to share quick laughs and clink wine glasses over takeout cartons and long days. But tonight, there were no glasses. No food. Just her and me and the weight of what we hadn't said. She pushed her plate aside, it was barely touched, and stared at her hands. She wasn't wearing makeup tonight. No earrings. Just a simple black sweater and jeans. Stripped of the designer polish, she looked younger. Smaller. Like the version of her I remembered from years ago, when we still talked about dreams without worrying if they fit into someone else's plan. She took a deep breath and looked at me. "I don't know who I am outside that job," she said, her voice trembling as though she'd never said the words out loud before. "I always thought, if I climbed far enough, stayed late enough, impressed the right people, Blair, Lawrence, that everything would finally make sense. That I'd matter." I didn't interrupt. I just listened. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't rehearsing a pitch or reciting some preloaded defense. She was just Camille, lost, hurt, and finally honest. She looked down again. I spent years proving I belonged in that firm. And somewhere along the way, I stopped defending the parts of me that actually did. Her fingers picked at the seam of the tablecloth. "Like you. Us." I swallowed hard. There it was. It wasn't bitterness I felt, though I'd be lying if I said it didn't flash through me sometimes. It wasn't even anger anymore. What I felt was more complicated. A grief. Almost, for the version of us that used to be strong, playful, imperfect, but real. The us that sat on this same table 6 years ago planning the Haven-build expansion, mapping out a life where my craftsmanship and her vision could build something together. We used to have a rhythm, and then that rhythm started to skip. Slowly, at first. Then it fractured completely. You didn't lose yourself, Cam, I said, choosing each word with care. You just stopped defending the parts of you that mattered. Her eyes met mine, full of something raw and vulnerable. I didn't know how to stop it, she whispered. Everything moved so fast. Blair gave me attention. Opportunities. I kept thinking, if I just stayed on her good side, if I just kept performing, maybe she'd make space for me. I didn't realize I was becoming her. I looked down at the wood grain beneath my hand. I'd carved this table, sanded every corner, sealed every groove. My hands had shaped it over weeks, and now it held this moment like a confession booth. You stood by her while she humiliated me, I said, softly but without apology. That wasn't about business, Cam. That was about basic respect. I know. Her voice cracked. I know. And it's killing me. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. She didn't sob. Camille never cried loudly. Even her breakdowns were quiet, like she was afraid to burden the world with her grief. She wiped at her face with the sleeve of her sweater, but the tears kept coming. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal. That you'd brush it off. That you always do, she said, her voice quivering. But when you walked away, when you told Dayton you were cutting ties, I saw it, Milo. I saw who you were. Who I stopped seeing a long time ago. I didn't say anything right away. I wanted to. God, I had so much I could say. But I knew the difference between words that filled silence and words that changed something. So I waited. I forgot, she said, almost to herself, how much strength it takes to stay kind. You've always carried things I never even noticed. You let me take the spotlight while you handled the weight. And I let them laugh at you like you were disposable. I finally spoke. You didn't just let them laugh, Cam. You laughed too. That one hurt her. She winced, her face folding in on itself like a collapsed structure. I was scared, she admitted. I was scared that if I said something, I'd be next. That Blair would turn on me. That I'd lose the life I worked for. You lost it anyway, I said gently. Not to wound her, but because it was true. She nodded, slowly. I know. The room went quiet again, but it wasn't sharp this time. It felt like the silence of something being rebuilt, painfully, slowly. Like we were picking up the same blueprint, unsure of whether we wanted to reconstruct what we had, or sketch something entirely different. I looked at her, really looked at her, not the woman from the gala, not the voice on the phone talking deadlines and drafts, but the woman I met all those years ago at that woodworking expo, the one who lingered too long at my booth because she liked the detail in a cherrywood drawer. She used to believe in detail, in effort. Somewhere along the way, she'd traded that for speed and power. But maybe, it wasn't too late to remember. I don't know what happens next, I said finally. I'm not making promises. Not yet. She nodded again, wiping at her cheeks. I'm not asking for them. I just wanted you to know I see it now. I see you. It wasn't an apology, not in the formal sense. But it was something more valuable, acknowledgement. And sometimes, the beginning of healing isn't in grand gestures, it's in being seen. Fully. Without excuse. We didn't talk about reconciliation that night. We didn't start mapping out how to put our marriage back together. That would come later, if at all. But what we did talk about was truth. About how we'd gotten here. About how we both let something beautiful become background noise. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept without bitterness in my chest. The hurt was still there, but the bitterness had left. And in its place, there was room, maybe not for us just yet, but for clarity, for dignity, for peace. I never raised my voice. Not once. I didn't flip the table or throw the wine. I didn't give them the drama they expected. What I did was simple. I stood up, walked away from a table that no longer deserved me, and looked a company president in the eye as I told him, I'm cutting ties. That sentence wasn't just about business. It was about everything. Because I wasn't only walking away from a contract. I was walking away from years of being diminished in whispers and polished jokes. From the quiet neglect, the small sacrifices that had piled up like dust in the corners of a house we no longer cleaned together. I walked away from pretending that being the plus one made me less than whole. That night, I chose something else. I chose self-respect. And it was terrifying. It's funny how fast things change once you start saying no. My inbox, once filled with repeat work orders and mild pleasantries from Andrus and Wren's staff, now overflowed with introductions from competitors, proposals with clean budgets, notes from people who had quietly admired my work from afar. The company that once mocked me as idiot trash had done more for my reputation by disrespecting me publicly than years of silent craftsmanship ever had. It was ironic, but also poetic. Camille, for her part, stayed quiet those first few days. Her leave of absence from work became indefinite. Her name, once said with admiration in industry circles, was now paired with the phrase, under review. We barely spoke beyond what was necessary, but there was no yelling. Just space. Time. Reflection. One afternoon, I found myself in the workshop, sanding the edge of a walnut slab, letting the vibration of the machine ease something restless in me. The shop had always been where I thought best. The grain of the wood, the scent of sawdust, it was my rhythm. My center. I paused, ran my hand over the polished edge, and felt the smoothness beneath my fingertips. Clean. Honest. A piece of work that could stand on its own without explanation. That's who I wanted to be now. That's who I'd forgotten I already was. I kept thinking back to that moment, the second I saw the name card. Idiot trash. Written in gold cursive like it was a joke wrapped in elegance. But what hit harder than the words was the reaction. The laughter. The silence from the woman who promised to have my back. And the way I sat there, smiling, not because I was okay, but because I already knew I was leaving. Because sometimes walking away is louder than any protest. I didn't plan to become a symbol, but somehow I did. People from all walks started reaching out. A guy from a fabrication firm messaged me. Saw what you did. Been in your shoes. Respect. A woman who ran a competitor design firm wrote, there's dignity in restraint. Let's talk collaboration. That night at the gala had been their show. But how I walked away. That became mine. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was clarity. Camille came into the workshop a week later. She didn't knock. Just stood in the doorway like she used to before she got too busy for things like this. I didn't look up immediately. I wanted to give her the space to decide what she had come to say. I saw the latest proposal, she said quietly, referring to the one from Maddox Designs, Andrus and Wren's fiercest rival. It's good. They're smart to come to you. I set the sander down and wiped my hands on a rag. They're respectful, I said. She nodded slowly, stepping further in. I used to be. The silence between us held, not sharp, not bitter, just honest. I know it doesn't fix anything, she said, but I wanted to say thank you for not making a scene, for showing grace when I didn't deserve it. I turned to her, really looking now. It wasn't grace, Cam, I said. It was choosing myself. Something I should have done a long time ago. She nodded again, tears welling but not falling. I see that now. And I think she did. Not just the damage, but the quiet strength it took to stand without applause, to leave without slamming the door. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I'd finally remembered who I was before the laughter, before the compromise. The man who builds, who crafts, who holds his name with quiet pride. That night at the gala, I walked away from a table full of people who thought they could define me. But what they never understood was, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward something else. Toward dignity. Toward peace. Toward the version of myself who didn't need a spotlight to matter. And maybe, just maybe, toward a future that belonged entirely to me. I never raised my voice. I didn't break anything. That night, when I stood from that table and calmly walked away, it wasn't anger that drove me, it was clarity. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small or overlooked or second best. I felt grounded. And when I told Lawrence Dayton, I'm cutting ties, I wasn't just speaking to a company. I was speaking to everything that had made me feel like I didn't belong. Camille, the laughter, the name card, the hollow apologies, they were all noise. White noise I had trained myself to ignore for the sake of keeping peace, for the illusion of partnership, for love that had stopped looking like love. But that night, I made a choice I should have made years ago. I chose me. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making a scene or proving anything to them. It was about self-respect. A quiet, firm refusal to let anyone else narrate my worth. I had spent years standing just outside the circle, building things with my hands, while others build illusions with words. They mocked the simplicity of what I did because they didn't understand it. But they stood in buildings I designed, sat at tables I crafted, and toasted in rooms I built. They couldn't see the value in the hands that built their foundation, until those hands let go. And Camille, my wife, my partner, she saw it too late. Maybe that's the cruelest part. She saw who I was only when I walked away. But even then, I didn't scream or slam doors. I didn't write long speeches or post anything online. I just left, with my dignity intact. And it turns out that silence echoed louder than anything I could have shouted. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see the man who was laughed at or labeled. I see the man who walked away. The man who rebuilt himself, not in spite of the insult, but because of it. And as I lay my tools down at the end of the day, sawdust in my palms and purpose in my chest, I know exactly what that moment was. It was the moment I chose peace over pride. It was the moment I remembered who I was. And that, I've learned, is what real love, real dignity, actually looks like, even if it means starting again. I was in the middle of boarding a flight to Zurich, surrounded by the quiet bustle of first-class travelers and polished airport announcements, when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with her name. Just the sight of it used to make me smile reflexively, like muscle memory tied to better days. But that morning, something was off. My stomach twisted before I even answered. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was the way her name didn't sit right on my screen anymore. "Hey, you might want to sit down," she said. There was no warmth in her voice. No nervous giggle. No apology. Just flat delivery. Almost as if she was reading off a script she'd practiced in front of a mirror. I was halfway through the boarding tunnel when I froze. I stepped aside, letting others pass, the weight of her tone sinking in before the words even landed. "I sold the farmhouse," she said. I didn't respond. Couldn't. My mouth was open, but the words got stuck somewhere between disbelief and rising nausea. "For 1 million, she added, like she was giving me a discount on a pair of shoes. 1 million, I finally managed to say. "It's worth 9. "Yeah, but Ray needed the capital for his fitness app, and you never really did anything with the place anyway." Ray. The name hit me like a low blow to the ribs. I leaned against the wall of the jetway, my boarding pass crumpling in my hand. "You mean your trainer?" I asked, my voice low and deadly calm. She hesitated. Just for a second. That was all I needed. "He's more than that," she finally said. "He believes in me. In us. He needed a partner." I hung up, not because I didn't have more to say, but because if I had said it, I might have screamed, might have cursed, might have lost the last shred of composure I had left in a public airport. Instead, I turned around. I walked straight to the airline desk and canceled my flight to Zurich. I was supposed to speak at the Global Agricultural Summit. I was going to unveil a hybrid irrigation model I'd spent 5 years developing. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was getting home. The drive from the airport back to the estate took 4 hours. Every mile I drove, I replayed her words in my head like a bad song I couldn't shut off. "He needed it more than you." That line kept echoing, not just because of its cruelty, but because of its arrogance. As if she truly believed she could take what generations had built and hand it over to some clown in gym shorts because she felt inspired. I wasn't even surprised about Ray. I'd seen the signs. Too many sessions that ran late. Too many weekend retreats that had nothing to do with wellness. I had chosen to look the other way, trusting the illusion because it was easier than facing the truth. I let the lie sit in our home like a ghost, silent but present. That was my mistake. But this was something else. This wasn't just infidelity. This was theft. Betrayal wrapped in casual conversation, sealed with a smug sense of entitlement. She thought she was playing chess, and that I was too naive to see the board. But what she didn't know, what she had never bothered to understand, was that the farmhouse she sold wasn't even the real one. By the time I reached the estate gates, the sky had turned a soft gray. Rain threatened in the distance, but hadn't fallen yet. I paused at the entrance and looked up at the wrought iron sign. Tolliver Acres. My grandfather's name. His legacy. Our legacy. The house that greeted me was familiar only in structure. It looked wrong somehow. Different. Like someone had tried to stage it for a magazine cover and failed miserably. Cheap paint-covered old brick. New furniture sat awkwardly in a house that once breathed history and purpose. They'd changed the drapes. Swapped out the light fixtures. Even the smell was different, artificial, hollow. But I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask who had moved in. Because I already knew. The moment she told me what she'd done, I knew she had sold the guest house. The replica. The one I had renovated a decade ago as a distraction project when I was recovering from back surgery. The one tourists came to for weekend retreats. It was a mock-up, a facade. The real farmhouse, the one passed down by my grandfather, had been relocated years ago. She sold a shell. I stood there on the gravel path and let that irony sink in. She thought she had stripped me of everything. She thought she had gutted me to fund her boyfriend's startup dreams. But all she'd done was pawn off an empty set piece, thinking it was the crown jewel. And that's when I laughed. Not a bitter, broken laugh. A real one. Quiet. Clean. I laughed because she had no idea what she'd actually done. She had no idea how much worse she had made it for herself. Because now I wasn't just angry, I was focused. I turned my back on the faux farmhouse and made my way to the real one. It sat hidden beyond the orchard, tucked behind an old ironwood grove and wrapped in the same white brick my grandfather laid himself in the 1940s. I'd moved it there out of sentiment and strategy. I'd preserved it down to the nail. That was the heart of the estate, and it was untouched. I lit the fireplace and sat in the old wooden chair by the window. I thought about the 10 years I gave to her. The trust. The compromises. The way I used to bring her here when we were first dating, showing her the fields, the soil, the sunsets. I thought she understood what it meant to be part of something older than money. Something rooted in time. But I was wrong. The woman I married would have protected this place with her life. The woman she became sold it for a boyfriend's business idea built on protein powders and shallow dreams. I poured myself a drink and watched the fire glow against the stone. I wasn't going to retaliate with anger. That's what she expected. She thought I'd come back swinging. But revenge, real revenge, is never loud. It's meticulous. Precise. Legal. Tomorrow, I'd call Miles. Tonight, I'd let the storm inside me settle, because the real one hadn't even started yet. I stepped onto the land just as dusk began to bleed into the edges of the sky. The soft orange glow kissed the tops of the trees, casting long shadows over the gravel path. It should have hurt, seeing the land in this condition, seeing what she had done to it. But all I felt was a cold, steady calm rising through me like smoke through a chimney. I wasn't heartbroken. That emotion had already been burned through. This was something else. This was focus. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I walked the perimeter. The place had been tampered with, decorated like some weekend getaway from a brochure for city couples looking to reconnect with nature. Someone had power washed the charm right off the brick walls. There were solar lights shoved into the flower beds, which had been dug out and replaced with mulch and some landscaping stones you could find at any hardware store. But what really stung, what made my jaw tighten, was the absence. Gone were the wind chimes that used to hang under the eaves. Gone was the broken rocking chair my grandfather used to sit in during summer evenings, refusing to throw it out because a man should have one thing he never replaces. Gone were the family photos I'd framed and hung in the hallway when we first moved in. It was like someone had tried to erase the soul of the house. I opened the door and walked in without knocking. The new locks were an insult. She'd changed them as if I was some intruder. But I had the master key, the one no one else knew about. I installed it years ago during a renovation, back when I still believed I needed to protect the place from outsiders, not my own wife. Inside, it looked worse. She or someone else had painted over the rich mahogany trim in an off-white that looked like drying glue. The old fireplace had been sealed. The scent of lemon-scented cleaner clung to the air like desperation. On the wall where my grandfather's portrait used to hang, there was now some abstract print in black and gold, trying too hard to look expensive. I knew she thought it was an upgrade, a modern touch. But it was just noise. Empty noise. I walked through the rooms like a ghost. I stopped in the kitchen, where we used to have coffee on Sunday mornings, where she once burned pancakes so badly we had to eat them with spoons. I stood in the hallway, where I used to find her humming to herself as she reorganized the bookshelf for the 5th time. I remembered the smell of fresh apples in September, the muddy boots we used to leave by the back door after harvest walks. None of that was here anymore. And yet, the pain didn't come. Because here's the part she didn't know. What no one knew, really. This house, this shell, it wasn't the real farmhouse. Not anymore. The real one, the one with history in its walls and blood in its bricks, was tucked away on the far side of the estate, across the willow-lined creek. I had moved it years ago, slowly, brick by brick, board by board, to protect it. I restored the replica for tourist retreats and business guests, letting this fake version soak up the attention while the real home slept in peace behind a veil of trees and tradition. This house, what she sold, was a decoy. She had no idea. I knelt down near the fireplace and pulled up a floorboard I had hollowed out years ago. Inside was a sealed envelope containing the original deed, clearly marked, signed, and notarized, with coordinates and descriptions pointing to the real farmhouse. There was also a letter from my grandfather, one I'd kept sealed until now. I broke it open and read it under the fading light. If you're reading this, it means the house has become a target. We build things in this family not for comfort, but for legacy. If someone tries to take that from you, let them think they've succeeded. The land remembers. And so do we. I closed the letter, set it back in the hollow, and sealed the board again. A deep breath escaped my chest, something between a sigh and a slow release of everything I'd held in since that call at the airport. Outside, the wind started to pick up, rustling the fields that had been left unattended. Weeds were creeping in along the edges. Tools were rusting on the side of the barn. The irrigation pipes I'd spent months designing sat in disrepair. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was planning. The next step would be legal. This wasn't about emotion now. It was about consequence. It was about reminding her, and Ray, that some legacies don't vanish because someone signs the wrong document. This was about restoration. Not just of property, but of pride. Of clarity. I walked the perimeter of the land one last time before heading back toward the old growth. As I passed the orchard, I stopped to pick a rotting apple off the ground and crushed it in my hand. The juice ran down my fingers, sticky and sour. She thought she could sell off my inheritance for pennies. She thought she could convert 10 years of partnership into a down payment on some man's dream. But all she did was start a fire in a place she didn't understand. I paused at the edge of the grove and looked back. The farmhouse she'd sold stood silent and dumb in the fading light. It looked proud in a hollow way, like someone wearing a medal they didn't earn. She thought she had one. But the truth? She had sold herself out of everything and didn't even know it yet. Tomorrow, I would go see Miles, the old lawyer who'd been by my grandfather's side until the end. He'd know what to do with the trust, with the clause, with the contract she never bothered to read. She had signed it blindly, trusting that I would never use it. But the moment she moved that money, without my signature, she triggered something irreversible. It wasn't just betrayal. It was proof. And proof was the only thing that mattered now. I walked back to the real farmhouse under the cover of nightfall. The house was lit with a single lamp in the window, glowing like a lighthouse. That's the difference between her and me. She lived for the illusion. I preserved the truth. And now the truth was about to come for her quietly, legally, and with the full weight of a legacy she never took the time to understand. The next morning, I was already on the road before the sun had fully risen. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as I left the estate, the fog still clinging low over the fields like a protective shroud. I didn't sleep much the night before, just enough to keep my mind sharp. Sleep wasn't important. Precision was. What Lila had done wasn't just reckless. It was illegal. She had no idea what she'd walked into when she thought she was making a bold, independent move. I drove to Ashcroft and Granger, the law firm that had handled my grandfather's affairs for nearly 4 decades. Miles Granger was the kind of man who wore linen in the winter and smelled like cedarwood and paper. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharper than his years should allow, and he never wasted words. When I walked into his office that morning, he looked up from his desk and smirked, just a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. "She did it, didn't she?" he asked, pushing a leather-bound folder across the desk. I nodded and sat down. "She sold the show," I replied. He chuckled, not with joy, but with grim satisfaction. "I told your grandfather that someone would try one day," Miles said. "He didn't trust easy, but he trusted you. That's why he wrote the iron clause." The iron clause. Grandfather's final safeguard, woven into the estate trust like a hidden blade in a gentleman's coat. It was clear, airtight, and legally binding. No property could be sold, transferred, mortgaged, or liquidated without the written consent of the heir, me. Any unauthorized transaction would trigger immediate legal reversal, asset recall, and full financial restitution payable by the offending party. No loopholes. No exceptions. She signed everything, I said. She thought I'd never enforce it. Miles opened the folder and slid a document toward me. "Then it's time." I looked over the form. It was simple, a trigger notice. Once filed with the county registrar and the family trust board, it would nullify the transaction within 72 hours. But that wasn't even the harsh part. The clause demanded restitution. She would owe the trust every cent from the fraudulent sale, plus damages. "This will hit her like a freight train," I said quietly, not with malice, but with certainty. Miles tapped his pen on the desk. "Good. She needs to understand legacy is not something you gamble." He leaned back in his chair. "Ray's involved, right?" I nodded once. "Then we'll need to move fast. Once people like him smell a crash coming, They start vanishing into the wind. I signed the trigger notice and passed it back to him. My hand didn't shake. We spent the next hour reviewing the trust in detail. I'd read it before more than once, but this time, every word felt different. He highlighted parts one hadn't considered in years. Provisions for estate damage. Clauses for personal asset freezes. Protections for generational holdings. My grandfather had written it with the kind of foresight you only get from surviving 2 wars and a lifetime of betrayal. He trusted love but documented his land like he was preparing for battle. Before I left the office, Miles handed me a sealed envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Your grandfather's final amendment. He told me to give it to you if this clause was ever used." I took the envelope and slid it into my coat pocket. My fingers ran across the seal, but I didn't open it. Not yet. When I got back to the estate, the air had shifted. It was crisper, cleaner. Maybe it was just my perspective. I walked straight to the study in the real farmhouse and locked the door. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the sale records. Lila hadn't just made a foolish move. She had documented it in painful detail. Her signature, her power of attorney claim forged with a digital stamp I never approved. The wire transfer to Ray's startup account. All right there. She thought the world was built on charm and momentum. She never understood that it's really built on paper and precedent. I drafted a legal letter, attached the trigger documents, and sent it to her email. Not a text, not a phone call. A formal communication with violation of estate clause, immediate restitution required, as the subject line. By the time I finished, it was nearly noon. I poured myself a black coffee and took it out to the porch. The field stretched out before me like an old painting, imperfect, weathered, and alive. I sat down and finally opened the envelope Miles had given me. Inside was a single sheet of heavy parchment paper, written in my grandfather's unmistakable scrawl. "If you're reading this, then the house didn't protect itself. But that's all right, because you did. You're my grandson, not just by blood, but by backbone. Don't let their noise make you doubt your silence. The land belongs to those who endure it, not just inherit it. Forgive where you must, but never forget who tried to erase your name from your own soil." I folded the letter and stared out across the trees. Forgiveness. That part still felt distant. I wasn't sure yet what it would look like. But forgetting? No, that wouldn't happen. Not because I was bitter, but because memory was part of survival. Later that evening, just as the sun started to dip again, I received a reply. "Lila." The subject line was empty. The body of the email was short. "What the hell is this? You're bluffing. You wouldn't ruin me like this." She still didn't understand. This wasn't about ruin. This was about restoration. She had walked into a battlefield blind, smiling, thinking she was the hero in her own little drama. But this land had its own memory. This legacy had its own rules. And she'd broken them all with a smirk. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the old wooden drawer in the study and pulled out a second file. One that listed every asset still in her name, at least for now. She was still living in the lake house. Still driving the BMW I leased under the estate fund. Still using the joint credit line. But not for long. Tomorrow, I'd trigger the next clause. Tonight, I'd sleep under a roof she never touched. In a house she never corrupted. On land that remembered every footstep and every betrayal. Because this wasn't just revenge. It was inheritance. And it was time she understood the difference. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. Miles had insisted we hold it in his private legal office, not the main boardroom. "Less show, more consequence," he'd said. And I agreed. This wasn't about putting on a display. It was about delivering truth with precision. I arrived 15 minutes early. The leather-bound folder sat in my hands like a loaded weapon. Inside was everything. The deed reversal, the trust activation, the wire fraud documentation, the clause enforcement order, and the restitution breakdown. Every page was prepared, signed, and ready for submission. All I needed was to watch her face when she realized what she'd done. At 10:03, the door creaked open, and she walked in like she owned the room. Lila wore her arrogance like perfume, strong, artificial, and impossible to ignore. Her heels clicked against the tile as she entered with the poise of someone who thought this was still a negotiation. Behind her was Ray, in a bomber jacket and sunglasses, indoors, no less, chewing gum like he was at a casting call. He didn't offer a handshake. I didn't offer a glance. Miles gestured for them to sit across from me. The table was wide, cold oak, just like my grandfather's dining table. Fitting. "I'm going to speak plainly," Miles began. "The Doku. What we're doing here is a courtesy. Lila blinked, smiling like she was humoring a child. I'm not sure I understand what the urgency is here. The sale was clean. The buyer was legitimate. Miles didn't flinch. You sold property held in a protected trust without the required written consent of the beneficiary. That triggers what we call the iron clause. He slid the folder across the table to her. She opened it with one manicured hand and started scanning. The shift was immediate. The smile dropped. Her eyes moved faster. Pages turned with increasing panic. Ray leaned over her shoulder. Wait, what is this? He said, frowning now. Restitution clause? Miles interjected calmly. That's the part where the trust sues for damages. The full market value of the illegal sale must be repaid by the offending party, or all associated assets become subject to freeze and liquidation. That includes joint property, vehicles, accounts, anything co-owned or funded through the estate. Lila's voice cracked for the first time. But I didn't know. I didn't mean. You didn't read, I said, finally speaking. That's not a defense. That's negligence. She turned to me then, fully. You're really going to do this to me? No, I replied, steady as stone. You did this to yourself. Ray laughed, clearly trying to deflect. Man, come on. It's just a house. And we've got bigger plans now anyway. The app is going public. Miles chuckled softly, almost pityingly. You might want to hold off on that press release, Mr. Raymond. The investment funds your company received were tied directly to stolen assets. That makes the transfer fraudulent. A recall has already been filed with the bank, and an injunction is pending with the local court. What the hell does that mean? Ray snapped. It means, I said, turning toward him, you're going to have to explain to your investors why their seed money was funded with stolen property proceeds. Good luck raising capital from behind a desk with no wheels. He stood suddenly. This is harassment. I'll sue. You're welcome to try. Miles replied calmly, reaching into his drawer and pulling out another envelope. But I would advise you read this first. Ray took it with a scowl. As he flipped through the paperwork, I could see the color drain from his face. Injunctions, fraud implications, wire transfer violations, his name was on every one of them. His signature, timestamped and traceable. The look in his eyes shifted from arrogance to dread in seconds. Lila, meanwhile, was now whispering to herself as she reread the documents. This can't be real. I didn't know. You can't just freeze everything. I live in that house. I need that car. That's my life. It was, I corrected her. Until you decided to sell mine. You could have warned me, she said bitterly. You could have told me before it got this far. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. You told me. On the phone, that Ray needed the money more than I did. You made your choice. I'm simply honoring it. She slumped back in her chair, the fire now flickering out. Miles waited a beat, then tapped a final document on the table. This is your notification of breach and formal notice of restitution enforcement. If you wish to contest it, you may do so in court, but I assure you, the odds are unfavorable. She didn't move. She just stared at the papers in front of her, like they might rearrange themselves into something more forgiving. But they wouldn't. Ray turned toward her, his tone suddenly cold. You told me this place was yours. I thought it was, she whispered, eyes wide. I stood. That was enough. I had seen what I needed to see. Before I walked out, I looked at her one last time. I didn't do this to punish you. I did this to protect what matters. Something you never cared to understand. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Outside, the air was crisp and bright. I walked to my truck without looking back. Behind me, I heard Ray raise his voice, demanding answers, demanding money. I didn't care. Let them fight it out among themselves now. They built their house of cards. It wasn't my job to hold it up. What mattered was the land. The real land. The one she didn't touch. The one she never valued because she was too busy chasing something shinier. I drove back to the farmhouse in silence, the folder beside me on the passenger seat. The trigger had been pulled. The clause was active. There was no going back now. But I wasn't grieving. I was reclaiming. Back at the estate, I walked the field alone. The wind was stronger now, pushing against me like resistance. But it didn't bother me. I had something stronger. Paperwork. Legacy. Truth. That night, I was sitting in the kitchen of the real farmhouse, a cup of black coffee cooling in my hand, when her name lit up on my phone. I stared at the screen for a moment, watching it buzz on the wooden table. The message preview flashed once. Can we talk? 3 words. Short. Almost innocent. But after everything, They felt like a punchline. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to block her. Another part wanted to ignore her into oblivion. But the bigger part, the one that had survived her betrayal, was curious. Not for her sake, but mine. What could she possibly say now? What story would she spin after watching her illusion crack in front of a lawyer and a man she once vowed to love? So I texted back, "Come to the farmhouse." The real one. She replied with a single question mark. I didn't elaborate. Let her figure it out. An hour later, her car pulled up the gravel path. She must have driven fast, too fast, because I could hear the tires skid slightly as she parked. When she stepped out, I saw her hesitate. She looked around, confused. This part of the land had been off limits for years. I kept it that way on purpose. She had no idea what was here. To her, it was just an overgrown patch of trees and brush. She never once asked why I insisted on maintaining it alone. Now she would see. She approached slowly, her heels crunching over the gravel, her coat pulled tight against the night chill. When she finally reached the porch, she looked up at me with wide eyes. This is the farmhouse?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. The real one. I watched as her eyes moved over the white brick walls, the antique lanterns glowing softly in the dark, the wooden beams hand-carved by my grandfather. Her mouth parted slightly, as if words were forming but couldn't quite push through. "You moved it," she said, stepping slowly onto the porch. "You rebuilt it out here?" "Brick by brick," I answered. "While you were spending weekends in Malibu and wellness retreats in the city, I was out here, preserving what mattered." She looked stunned, not just because of what she saw, but because of what it meant. That the house she sold, the one she thought was the crown jewel, was nothing more than a prop. I stepped aside and let her in. She walked through the doorway like she was stepping into a church, quiet, hesitant, reverent. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the old armchair, the fireplace, the framed photos still sitting untouched on the mantel. Her fingers grazed the edge of the oak table as she passed, like she was testing if any of it was real. "I thought I knew this land," she said, more to herself than to me. "I thought we were building something here." "No," I said plainly. "You were waiting for it to grow in value so you could cash out." She turned to face me. "That's not fair." "What part isn't?" I asked. "The part where you sold it behind my back? The part where you funded your boyfriend's dream with my legacy? Or the part where you thought you were clever enough to get away with it?" Her face flushed. For a moment, I thought she'd fire back with one of her signature comebacks, the kind she used when we argued about furniture or friends or finances. But this wasn't that version of her. This was something else. Something stripped bare. "I didn't plan it like that," she said finally. "It didn't start that way. I didn't even mean to fall for Ray. I just what?" She looked away. I felt invisible. "You were always working. Always obsessed with the land, the trust, the crops. Everything had to be done your grandfather's way. You talked more to your irrigation team than you talked to me. Ray, he made me feel seen. I let that hang in the air. I wasn't going to defend myself. I wasn't going to argue that I worked hard so we could live well, that I kept the legacy intact because someone had to. I wasn't even going to remind her that I'd invited her to be a part of it 100 times before she chose distance over participation." She walked toward the mantel and picked up a photo. Me and grandfather, arms around each other, covered in soil from digging the new water line back in 2011. "He left this to you because he knew you'd protect it," she said quietly. "And I tried to sell it like it was nothing." "You didn't just try," I said. "You did." She put the photo back down and took a deep breath. "Ray's gone. He left the same night you triggered the clause. Said he didn't sign up for drama. His app isn't going anywhere. I haven't heard from him since." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She turned to me again. Her voice was softer now. "I didn't love him. I thought I did. I think I just loved the idea of escape, of feeling like someone needed me." "You were needed," I said. "But you wanted worship." Silence settled between us. Heavy. Honest. "I've been staying in a motel," she said finally. "My accounts are frozen. My lawyer says I should try to negotiate a settlement." "There's nothing left to negotiate," I said. "You violated the trust." "The house you live in? Not yours. The car? Leased through the estate. Even your name is on the list for court restitution. You don't need a lawyer. You need accountability." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't move. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I nodded. "That's a start." She sat down at the table, her shoulders slumped. The powerful, calculating woman who once stood over me in arguments now looked like someone who had lost her map. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I just wanted you to know. I get it now. What this place means. What I ruined." I poured her a glass of water and slid it across the table. It wasn't just a house. It was history. She nodded slowly, gripping the glass like it was the only solid thing left in her life. "I should go," she said after a while. I opened the door for her. She paused in the doorway and turned back. "Thank you for not humiliating me," she said. "I didn't need to," I replied. "You did that yourself." She walked out into the night, her silhouette fading into the shadows like a ghost retreating to wherever it came from. I stood there for a while, staring at the spot where she'd sat. The house felt heavier somehow, like it had absorbed everything she said. But it also felt stronger, like the truth had finally settled into the floorboards. I turned off the lights and walked upstairs. She had finally seen the real farmhouse. But more importantly, she had finally seen what she gave up. The next morning was colder than usual. The kind of morning where the frost clings to every surface like a warning. I stood on the back porch of the real farmhouse, a thermos of coffee in one hand and the other tucked in my coat pocket. The field stretched out in every direction, silent and waiting, like they were holding their breath. I watched a few birds flutter from one branch to the next in the old oak trees, the only movement in an otherwise still world. It was peaceful. But I knew that peace had a price, and I was about to collect. I had spent the last few days reviewing everything, every account Lila touched, every credit card she used, every subtle withdrawal masked as miscellaneous expenses. She had been draining money behind my back for years. Not in dramatic sums, but in quiet, calculated ways. Small transfers to private accounts. New accounts I hadn't even known existed. Gifts she bought for friends, but never explained. Donations to fitness charities with Ray's name listed on the advisory board. Even a small wire labeled business development that had ended up in a shell company. And all of it was mine, my money, my effort, my family's legacy. But that wasn't what hurt the most. What hurt was how easy it had been for her to do it, and how easy it had been for me to miss it. I sat at my desk in the study, the windows open just enough to let the chill keep me awake. In front of me was a binder I'd labeled withdrawals, unapproved. Each page told a story of betrayal. Some were petty, some were surgical. All of them were dishonest. By the time the sun had fully risen, I knew what I had to do. There was a second clause, a part of the estate trust buried in legal language and overlooked by almost everyone except Miles, and now me. It was called the fraud clause. It stated that if a legal spouse committed financial misconduct, defined as theft, unauthorized asset liquidation, or fraudulent transactions, they forfeited all access to jointly owned assets until a full investigation by the Family Trust Board concluded. But the real blow? The clause also authorized the trust to immediately lock or reassign all estate-related holdings to the original heir. Everything. The house Lila was still technically squatting in. The car registered under her name. Even the passive investments she'd been benefiting from for years, dividends from land leases, profits from the Vineyard Partnership, trust fund interest accounts. They could all be seized, reassigned, or frozen with a single court submission. And today, I would pull that lever. I met Miles at his office by 10 a.m. sharp. He was already waiting, tie loosened slightly, glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed the file I'd sent him the night before. "She skimmed more than I expected," he said, flipping through the binder. "But you documented it well. This is more than enough." "I want to trigger the fraud clause," I said. "All of it." He looked up at me. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He nodded. "Then let's get to work." We spent the next few hours preparing the formal filings, statements, affidavits, transfer requests. I signed where needed. He notarized where required. By noon, it was done. "All we need to do is deliver this packet to the county clerk and the trust board office," he said. "After that, she's locked out." And so, by 2 p.m., the trigger was pulled. It didn't take long for the consequences to unfold. At 3:47 p.m., I got a call from the local sheriff's office. They'd been dispatched to her address to deliver the notice of eviction and asset freeze. "No drama," they said. She answered the door, confused, tried to argue, but when they handed her the envelope, she went silent. Signed for it. Then stepped back inside and shut the door. At 4:22, she tried to access the joint account. Denied. At 4:29, her card was declined at a boutique she frequented downtown. The owner, who also happened to be the cousin of one of my ranch managers, texted me personally. "Your wife tried to use a frozen card. Looked shaken. Didn't make a scene, though. At 5:02, my phone rang again. It was her. I stared at the screen. Let it ring twice. Then picked up. "You froze everything," she said, voice sharp and breathless. I triggered the clause. I replied evenly. "You activated it the moment you started taking what wasn't yours. You can't do this," she hissed. "I have nowhere to go." "You had a house," I said. "You sold it. You had savings. You drained them. You had a marriage. You threw it away." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know it would come to this. You didn't care where it would go, as long as it got you what you wanted." She was quiet for a beat. Then, "Ray's gone. Everyone's gone." "I'm not surprised," I said. "People like him only stick around when there's something to take." "You're not even angry," she said, almost in disbelief. "You sound like you're reading from a script." "I'm past anger," I replied. "Anger was last week. This is something different. This is clarity." Silence. Then, softly, "What happens now?" "Now," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Now you live with the choices you made. And I rebuild what you tried to destroy." She hung up. No screaming. No begging. Just the soft, resigned sound of someone who realized the door had finally shut. That night, I went through the house and made notes for restoration. Floors to be polished. Paint to be stripped. Furniture to be replaced. I called Jacob, the same carpenter who helped me rebuild the replica farmhouse, and asked if he was free next month. He said yes, and when I told him why, he said simply, "About time." I spent the rest of the evening walking the land, breathing the cold air, watching my breath hang in front of me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt grounded. There was no parade in my chest. No thrill of revenge. Just a steady beat of purpose. She took what she could because she thought I'd never fight back. Because I'd spent so long loving quietly, supporting patiently, listening when no one else would. She mistook my calm for weakness. But calm isn't weakness. It's preparation. It's restraint. And now that the rope had been pulled, the curtain lifted, the game exposed, there was only one thing left to do. Begin again. The next morning, the frost had melted into mist, and the weight of what I had done settled into the walls of the house like silence after a storm. Triggering the fraud clause hadn't been a whim. It was a line in the sand. One that couldn't be crossed again. I knew Lila would try something. She always did. When cornered, she'd squirm, then charm, then throw herself into chaos hoping someone else would clean it up. But this time, I was done being the cleaner. I had barely finished my coffee when my phone buzzed. It was Miles. "She's already called 3 different attorneys," he said without preamble. 2 declined. 1 agreed, until he read the trust documents. I smirked. "They read the clause?" "Twice," he said, his tone dry. "The language is clear. The moment you sign that trigger, everything in her name tied to the estate was locked. She's calling it theft." I reminded her it was preservation. "She won't stop," I said. "No," he agreed. "But she'll lose." That afternoon, I visited the Trust Board's regional office. A modest 2-story building tucked between a law firm and a florist, but what went on inside carried the weight of legacy. Generational wealth doesn't rely on passion. It runs on documents, signatures, and unbreakable clauses, something Lila had never understood. I met with Miranda DeWitt, chair of the local estate division. An older woman with silver-streaked hair and a voice that didn't need to rise above a whisper to command attention. She greeted me with a firm nod, gesturing to a chair across her desk. "We've reviewed the documents. Every transfer, every expense, every login trail. You did your homework." "I had to," I said. She was siphoning my life while sleeping beside me. "She's not the first," Miranda said, not unkindly. "Entitlement dressed as love rarely ends quietly." She slid a folder across the table. "Here's the formal confirmation. As of 10 a.m., Lila Tolliver is locked out of all estate-linked accounts, properties, and legal privileges. She cannot access, contest, or claim anything unless she wishes to fight the trust in court, and even then, the burden of proof falls entirely on her." I nodded. "Let her try. Just be ready," Miranda said, locking eyes with me. "This is the part where they scramble. Desperate people get noisy." Noisy was right. By evening, my inbox was filled with them. "How could you do this to her? She made a mistake. This isn't justice, it's cruelty. You're being cold." "Vindictive." "Cold? No. I had been warm for too long. I had given kindness where I should have given boundaries. And now, when I finally stood up for what was mine, they called it cold. But I didn't respond. Instead, I sat on the front porch that night, watching the stars come out over the land. The house was quiet, steady. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt clarity. Not peace, exactly, but direction. And then, as if on cue, I heard tires on gravel. I didn't move. A beat-up black sedan rolled to a stop at the edge of the drive. Lila stepped out, coat wrapped tight around her. I searching the dark until they landed on me. She didn't come any closer than the bottom step. I know I can't win, she said. They told me that. I said nothing. Let the silence answer her. I know I hurt you, she continued. But it wasn't all fake. We had something once, didn't we? Once, I said. She looked down at her hands. I was scared. You were slipping away. The house, the land, your work, you always had somewhere else to be. Ray made me feel like I mattered. And so you sold my legacy, I replied, calm and sharp, to feel significant. Tears welled in her eyes. I made a mistake. No, I said. A mistake is spilling coffee. You made a choice. Over and over again. She took a deep breath. I have nothing left. Ray's gone. My name is ruined. My friends don't return my calls. My mom's cut me off. I don't even have an apartment now. You had a home, I said. You burned it. She stood there a moment longer. Then, with trembling fingers, she reached into her coat and pulled out a crumpled envelope. What's that? My confession, she said. A statement. Detailing everything. The transfers. The app scam. The forged signature. I wrote it for the trust board. For you. I stood slowly, walked down the steps, and took the envelope. I'll review it, I said. Will that help? It'll decide how you leave this behind, I said plainly. With a whisper or a lawsuit. She laughed bitterly, wiping at her face. Even now, you're still controlled. No, I said, turning away. I'm just no longer yours to manipulate. She got in her car and drove off without another word. Back inside, I opened the letter. It was sloppily written, but it was honest. She admitted to every transaction, every lie, every meeting with Ray. She even included dates, account names, and descriptions of when she started feeling like stealing felt safer than asking. I handed it to Miles the next morning. He read it silently. We'll keep this. Could save us weeks of litigation. Use it as leverage, I said. Not to punish her. Just to end this clean. He nodded. By Friday, the trust board sent their final notice. In exchange for the signed confession and permanent forfeiture of all estate claims, they would spare her from court. She would not face criminal prosecution, but she would be legally barred from any future claims, assets, or public statements about the trust, me, or the estate. It was done. The trap had been sprung, not with anger, not with shouting, but with truth. She fell in slowly, and now she couldn't climb back out. I spent that evening back on the land, watching the wind ripple across the wheat like the surface of a lake. I felt lighter. Not happy, but lighter. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, like soil settling after the rain. The farmhouse stood tall again. It had taken weeks of planning, hiring, lifting, and rebuilding, but the soul of the estate had started to breathe again. There was something sacred about restoring something that had been damaged, not just the land, but myself too. The truth is, when Lila betrayed me, she didn't just sell a property. She tried to erase years of devotion, decades of labor, generations of sacrifice. But the roots of this place ran deeper than her reach. The front porch had been sanded and stained anew. The paint peeled by the sun and years of storms was replaced with a clean coat of whitewash, just like my grandfather had done every spring. The weather vane creaked slightly in the breeze, its rust now scrubbed clean. Inside, I'd removed the last traces of her. Every framed photo that once held our smiles together had been boxed away. The kitchen no longer smelled like citrus cleaner and artificial candles. It smelled like cinnamon, sawdust, and fresh brewed coffee again. But the biggest restoration wasn't the structure. It was the silence. Good silence. The kind that didn't ache. The kind that let you hear your own thoughts without flinching. One by one, I'd called back the people who once made this land thrive. Raul, the groundskeeper, who had left when Lila restructured operations and replaced him with a landscaping app. MS. Delaney, the seasonal cook who used to prepare fresh pies for tour guests, let go with no warning. Even Carter, the farmhand who used to repair fences and run the harvest trucks, I found him 2 towns over, working at a car wash. When I asked him to return, he cried. We rebuilt, quietly. No press. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just people who cared about the land coming back to do what they did best. I doubled their pay, set up housing allowances, reopened the old guest barn, and turned it into a community workspace. If Lila had tried to turn this estate into a cash grab, I would turn it into something better, stronger, not just on paper, but in purpose. The crops were next. Most of the fields had been left to rot. Irrigation lines clogged, fencing down, the soil compacted and tired. But we worked it back to life. We cleared the overgrowth, tested the nutrients, brought in livestock rotation to aerate the dirt. For weeks, I came home with sore legs, blisters, and dirt under my nails. And it felt good, because it was mine, earned, preserved. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hill and painted everything in gold, I stood at the edge of the northern field and watched the workers pack up. Raul gave me a thumbs up from the tractor. Carter shouted something about beer. I waved and promised I'd bring cold ones tomorrow. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Not rushed, careful, hesitant. I turned. It was Sophia, not a stranger, a neighbor. One of the few who had stayed silent during Lila's downfall, not out of spite, but caution. Sophia had always been kind to us, even when Lila barely acknowledged her. She had a quiet strength, ran a floral nursery just down the road, and once gave me homemade jam when I'd helped her fix her fence after a storm. She held a small basket in her hands, full of biscuits and herbs. I heard the orchard's back up, she said. Thought I'd come see for myself. I smiled. It's breathing again. She looked past me to the trees in the distance. It's good, seeing this place alive. Felt like a ghost town for a while. It was, I admitted. But ghosts don't get to keep the keys. She chuckled at that, then stepped closer and handed me the basket. I don't want to intrude. I just wanted to say I'm glad you stayed. I nodded. I almost didn't. I know, she said. But the land needs people who remember where it came from. I looked at her then, not just as a neighbor, but as someone who understood what legacy meant. And I realized how rare that was. Thank you, I said, more sincerely than I'd said anything in a long while. She left not long after. But that moment stayed with me. Because rebuilding wasn't just about structures or soil. It was about people, community, trust, not just in others, but in yourself again. I spent that night in the old reading room, the fire crackling in the hearth. The house creaked in familiar places, not because it was falling apart, but because it was settling, like an old soul stretching its limbs after a long sleep. I pulled out the old ledger my grandfather had used to track crop cycles. Inside were notes from decades ago, pencil-scrawled margins about weather patterns, planting predictions, even reminders to talk to the chickens more. They seemed tense. One entry stood out. If the land ever falls into the wrong hands, remember this. It doesn't die. It waits. For someone worthy. Someone patient. Someone who listens. I ran my fingers over the ink. It hadn't died. And I had waited. And now, I was listening. In the following weeks, the estate began to bloom. Not just the trees and crops, but the spirit of the place. People began showing up again. Old friends. Former business partners who had once written me off after Lila's betrayal. Some apologized. Most didn't. And that was fine. Because I wasn't bitter. I was better. Even Lila, for all the destruction she left behind, had given me something. Perspective. She taught me how blind trust can be a trap. How silence isn't always kindness. How love, when left untended, becomes entitlement. But more than anything, she taught me how to start again. By month's end, the estate had a new name. Not Tolliver Acres anymore. That name was gone with her. I renamed it Red Hill Farm, a nod to the clay-rich soil that stained your boots when the rain came heavy. Honest, strong, unmistakable. I had new signage carved from oak, installed at the front gate with care. Sophia was the first to see it. She smiled. Looks good. It feels right, I said. And it did. Because I wasn't restoring what had been lost. I was building something new, with the bones of the past, yes, but for a future no one could steal again. 2 months had passed since I triggered the final clause. 2 months since the silence on my land had changed from suffocating to sacred. Each sunrise felt earned. Each small victory. A patch of revived soil, a restored barn beam, the return of a seasonal worker, was no longer a bandage over pain, but a brick laid into something permanent. But there was still one thread left untied. Not legal, not financial, personal. Lila's attorney reached out through official channels with a settlement proposal. I'd been expecting it. It was written in that half-apologetic, half-cautious tone that lawyers use when their clients have finally run out of cards to play. The letter admitted that Lila could not challenge the trust, not legally, not ethically. Her confession had made sure of that. She had no grounds left, no loophole, no defense. What she wanted now, apparently, was dignity. Her lawyer called it a graceful exit. The offer was simple. If I agreed to a formal settlement outside of court, she would sign over all remaining property and assets tied to the trust, issue a public statement acknowledging her misconduct, and never attempt to contact or interfere with the estate again. In return, I would cover her legal fees and not pursue public litigation. It was, objectively, a good deal. Clean, efficient, final. But I wasn't interested in final. I was interested in understanding. So I agreed to the terms, but added one condition of my own. She had to come in person and sign it. No digital signature. No courier. No evasions. Face to face. The meeting was set for a Thursday afternoon in Miles Granger's office. The same place where she'd once sat beside Ray, smiling, dismissive, confident in her plan. Now, she would return to that same table, alone. I arrived early. Miles poured coffee and said nothing, though the look in his eyes told me he knew this wasn't about closure on paper. 10 minutes past the hour, she arrived. Different. Not dramatically broken or suddenly humbled, but quieter. She wore a black sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back, no makeup, no jewelry. She looked smaller, not in stature, in presence, like someone who had been unraveling thread by thread and only just noticed how bare the spool had become. She nodded at Miles, then looked at me. Hi. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just gestured for her to sit. She slid into the chair across from me and opened the folder on the table. Her hands were steady. She flipped through the pages like someone who already knew what she was giving up. I read every line, she said. Twice. You understand what it means? Miles asked. Yes, she said. It means I walk away with nothing. I looked at her. It means you walk away with your name. That's more than you gave me. She flinched. Just slightly. But enough. I deserve that, she admitted. No, I said. You deserve the consequences. This is just resolution. She nodded again, then reached for the pen. She paused just before signing. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I know I don't deserve that. I just wanted to say. I wasn't trying to ruin you. You just didn't care if you did, I said evenly. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I kept thinking I'd fix it later. That somehow, if Ray's business took off, I'd pay it all back, make it up to you. But it wasn't about money, I said. It was never about the dollars. It was about loyalty, integrity, and you sold those for a fantasy. She signed the papers. Miles gathered them, checking the signatures, then slid the final document into his folder. It's done, he said. But it wasn't. Not quite. She turned to me, voice soft. I see everything now. The real house. The real land. The real you. I didn't see any of it before. I just saw what I thought was holding me back. I didn't respond. Let her speak. I thought power meant control, she continued. But I see now that real power is restraint. You could have destroyed me. Publicly. Legally. But you didn't. No, I said. I let the truth do it. She stood slowly, gathering her coat. Thank you for not dragging my name through the mud. You did that yourself. I replied, not cruelly, just honestly. She lingered at the door for a moment. If you ever need help on the farm, volunteer work, I'd show up. Just to give something back. I shook my head. There's no debt left to pay here. But there's a life out there you still have to live. Go build something real this time. And with that, she left. The silence that followed her exit was different than the one before it. Not tense. Not bitter. Just complete. A chapter finally closed. That evening, I returned to the farmhouse. The porch lights were warm, the house buzzing with the quiet rhythm of a life no longer interrupted by betrayal. I poured a glass of bourbon, stepped outside, and sat in my grandfather's old rocking chair. For years, I'd thought justice was something loud. Courtrooms, accusations, revenge. But I was wrong. Justice, real justice, is quiet. It's choosing not to swing when you're holding the sword. It's letting someone destroy themselves by their own choices. It's knowing you could humiliate them and deciding not to. The next day, I received a delivery. A single envelope. Inside was a check, modest in amount, with a note, to cover my last month in the lake house. I know it doesn't matter, but I wanted to leave one door closed properly. Signed, Lila. I didn't cash it. I didn't even deposit it. I tucked it in the back of the ledger, behind the entries my grandfather once wrote, under the note about talking to the chickens. Because not every gesture needs a transaction. Some are just a period at the end of a long, broken sentence. The morning light spilled through the windows of the real farmhouse like honey, soft and golden, stretching across the wooden floors and warming the air with that familiar glow I hadn't felt in years. It was the kind of light that made you stop mid-step just to breathe it in. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen with a cup of coffee in my hand, watching as the mist rolled off the fields. The land looked alive again, not just green and blooming, but proud, like it knew it had been defended. A year had passed since the call that shattered everything, and I was still here, still standing. But I wasn't the same man who had answered the phone that day at the airport terminal, briefcase in hand, passport tucked in my coat pocket, eyes fixed on a life built around certainty. That man was gone, and in his place stood someone quieter, stronger, and more deliberate. I had learned a lot since then. That love without respect is just dependency dressed up in vows. That silence is not always peace. It's sometimes a warning, and that sometimes the only way to reclaim what's yours is not to fight louder, but to stand still and let the storm run out of breath. After signing the final documents and watching Lila walk away for the last time, the months that followed weren't about revenge or celebration. They were about building. Rebuilding the farm. Rebuilding the team. Rebuilding myself. I returned to the land like a soldier returns home after battle, changed, cautious, but determined. Each morning began with a walk along the east field. The path had become a ritual. I'd check the rows of young crops, feel the soil between my fingers, make notes in the old leather-bound notebook my grandfather had left me. The simple act of observing growth, patient, steady, quiet, taught me more about healing than any therapist could. The workers had settled into a rhythm again. Raul ran the greenhouse like a general. Carter took pride in the new irrigation lines. Ms. Delaney had returned to the kitchen and was once again feeding anyone who walked through her door, farmhands, visitors, even the occasional traveler who found our little slice of land by accident. And Sophia. Well, Sophia had become something steady too. It started with biscuits and conversation, then shared walks through the orchard. She never pressed, never asked questions about Lila or the past. She simply listened, laughed, and showed up. Sometimes that's all it takes. One afternoon, we sat beneath the willow tree by the creek, watching the water slip by like it didn't have a care in the world. You ever think, she said, that maybe the land kept you so rooted so you wouldn't blow away when the storm came? I looked at her and smiled. Every day. The truth was, legacy isn't just something we inherit. It's something we preserve through choices, through quiet decisions made when no one's watching, through the people we let into our lives and the ones we let go of. Lila was gone now. No calls. No emails. Just silence. The clean kind. Word around town was she'd moved 3 states away, started working at a small nonprofit, and hadn't tried to use the Tolliver name again. That name didn't mean anything anymore, not since I renamed the estate. Red Hill Farm had become more than a fresh start. It became a symbol of what survives, of what matters. Every Sunday morning, I'd sit on the porch and sip coffee as the sun came up. And every Sunday, without fail, Sophia would walk up the path from her nursery, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with nothing but a smile. We didn't need labels. Not yet. Maybe not ever. We were just 2 people who understood that healing didn't always need a destination. One particular morning, as the wind picked up and the wheat danced in the field like waves, I found myself reading the last letter my grandfather ever wrote me. I'd kept it tucked inside the back of the ledger, behind Lila's uncashed check and a sprig of lavender Sophia had once handed me without explanation. If the day ever comes when the world tries to take this from you, remember, you're not just defending land. You're defending history. The kind that can't be measured in acres or dollars. The kind that lives in your bones. He was right. This place was never about ownership. It was about stewardship. About keeping something alive that others would have let die. That night, I hosted a small gathering on the porch. Just the core crew. Raul, Ms. Delaney, Carter, and Sophia. No speeches. No toasts. Just laughter, warm food, and stories under the... She laughed. I see a man who let go of what broke him without breaking anyone else. That's rare. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just smiled and took another sip of bourbon. When the night ended and everyone went home, I stayed out on the porch a little longer. The air was cool and the stars were endless. And in that stillness, I let out a long, deep breath. Not out of relief, but because I finally could. Because the farmhouse she tried to sell was never really mine to lose. Because I had never been broken, just buried. And now, I was growing again, rooted in truth, watered by patience, and surrounded by people who saw the man beneath the wreckage. Not a victim, not a fool, but a keeper of something sacred, something that would never be sold again.